I don't want to waste money keeping a useless old man alive. That was what my son told the doctor while I lay in an ICU bed. The machines said I was still unconscious. My wife and son believed it too, but they were wrong. I could hear every word. Then my wife asked, "If his heart stops, what paperwork do we sign to make sure they don't bring him back?" I stayed completely still and kept pretending I was in a coma. 3 days later, I discovered the real reason they were so desperate for me to never wake up. Before we go any further, if this story is already hitting different, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Your city, your country, wherever you are in the world. I read every single one, and knowing you're out there means everything to me. A quick note. This story contains fictional elements woven in for storytelling and reflection. Any similarity to names or places is coincidental, but everything it's trying to say to you, that part is worth hearing. The machine said I was unconscious. My family said they wished I wouldn't wake up. They were both wrong, and that mistake cost them everything. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. My name is James Caldwell. I'm 61 years old. I live in a neighborhood called Desert Mountain in Scottsdale, Arizona, the kind of place where the driveways are wider than most apartment hallways, and the HOA has opinions about your mailbox color. I built Caldwell Construction Group from a single rented office on North Scottsdale Road back in 1998, starting with nothing but a business plan, a second mortgage on a house I could barely afford, and the kind of stubbornness that doesn't know enough to quit. By 2025, we had over 200 employees, a commercial real estate portfolio spread across the Phoenix metro area, and a revenue number that made grown men in expensive suits sit up straight when I walked into a room. I say had like it's past tense. We'll come back to that. My wife Diana, 56, had been with me for 29 years. We met when I was still drawing blueprints on a folding table in our garage. She believed in me before I had any real reason to ask her to. Our son Ryan, 31, held the title of Director of Business Development at the company, a position I created for him, because I wanted him close, because I wanted to pass something down, because that's what fathers do when they've built something worth passing. That's what I told myself anyway. It was a Tuesday evening in mid-October when everything changed. I'd had a long day at the office, a contract negotiation that had run 3 hours past schedule, the kind of meeting where everyone leaves the room feeling like they lost something. I remember checking my phone at a red light on North Scottsdale Road. Diana had texted, "Dinner's in the oven." The last clear thing I remember is the green light turning, pulling into the intersection, and then a wall of sound and white and nothing. A delivery truck ran the light at close to 50 miles an hour and hit the driver's side dead on. The paramedics said the seatbelt saved my life. They said a lot of things I wasn't awake to hear. I woke up partially on day 3, and I wish I could tell you the first thing I felt was relief. Here's what nobody tells you about being in a coma. It is not sleep. It is not peaceful darkness. It is something far more cruel than that. It is being locked inside your own body like a prisoner in a cell with no door. You can hear everything. You can register everything, but you cannot move a finger, cannot open an eye, cannot make a single sound to tell the world that you are still in there. The machines beep. The nurses talk. Footsteps come and go in the hallway outside. And you just lie there, completely aware, completely helpless, listening. Scottsdale Osborne Medical Center, ICU, 3rd floor. I knew because I heard a nurse mention it to a colleague during a shift change. The first voices I recognized on day 3 were the doctor's and Diana's. "Mr. Caldwell is showing improved brain activity," the doctor said. His voice was measured, careful, the voice of a man who had delivered bad news often enough to know how to wrap it in cautious language. "We're seeing positive signs, but I want to be honest with you. He could remain in this state for another week, possibly 2. We'll continue monitoring closely." "And if he doesn't improve?" Diana asked. Her voice was steady, remarkably steady. "Then we'd need to have a more difficult conversation about long-term care options." transferring him to a specialized acute care facility, and depending on how things progress, discussing intervention preferences, ventilator support, resuscitation protocols. A pause. Footsteps. Then the door opened, and I heard a third voice, Ryan. Sorry I got here as fast as I could. What did I miss? Diana caught him up in 4 sentences. Clinical, efficient, like a project status update. Then Ryan said, Doctor, what are the actual odds here, realistically? The doctor gave the same careful answer he'd given Diana. Another pause. Longer this time. Improved brain activity, he said again, but the kind of improvement that still left a 20% chance of full recovery. The kind of odds that, depending on who was doing the math, looked less like hope and more like a complication. Then my son, my 31-year-old son, the boy I had coached through Little League and driven to college orientation, and handed a corner office at the company I had bled for, said the following words in a tone as flat and businesslike as if he were declining a vendor contract. I don't want to waste money keeping a useless old man on life support. I felt my entire chest turn to concrete. Diana didn't gasp, didn't say his name in warning. What she said was, if his heart stops, what paperwork do we sign to make sure he isn't resuscitated, the DNR or whatever it's called? The doctor explained Arizona's DNR process, that as James Caldwell's spouse, Diana had the legal authority to execute a do not resuscitate order on his behalf, given that I had no advance directive on file. He explained it gently, professionally, the click of a pen cap, the scratch of a signature on paper, right there, 3 feet from where I was lying. I have replayed that sound 10,000 times since that afternoon. The specific, quiet, ordinary click of a ballpoint pen. Diana signing a document that said, if this man's heart stops, let him go. And Ryan adding almost cheerfully, he always said he'd hate being kept alive by machines. That's just who Dad is. I never said that. Not once in 61 years of living had those words ever left my mouth. My hands wanted to shake. My jaw wanted to clench. Every muscle in my body wanted to react, to sit up, to speak, to let them know that the man they were burying was right there, listening to every word. But some survival instinct, deeper than rage, whispered one instruction, hard and clear as a gunshot. Do not move. Do not react. Just listen. Remember everything. That instinct, cold and specific and surgical, was the thing that saved me. Not the seatbelt. Not the paramedics. That one decision to lie still and let them talk, because they had more to say, much more, and I had absolutely nothing but time. They thought the machines were the ones keeping track of me. They were wrong about that too. The most dangerous recording device in that hospital room wasn't attached to any wall. It was the mind of a man they'd already written off, and it was running at full capacity. Nobody prepares you for day 4, day 3. There's still shock in the air. The flowers arrive, the hushed voices, the careful walking around feelings. But by day 4, the shock wears thin. And what's underneath it, what people actually think and feel and want, starts breathing through the cracks. I know this because I was there for all of it. The afternoon of day 3 had gone quiet after the doctor left. Diana and Ryan stayed another 40 minutes talking about logistics, who was handling the office, whether the insurance paperwork had been started, whether someone had called my attorney, Tom Briggs. All reasonable things to discuss. All the kinds of things a family has to figure out when one of their own ends up in a hospital bed. I understood that. I told myself I understood that. But then Ryan said, I moved my stuff into Dad's office this morning, just temporarily. It makes more sense while I'm running things. And Diana said, that makes sense. And something cold settled into my chest that had nothing to do with the accident. Day 4 brought a different version of Ryan, the one I recognized from board meetings when he thought he was the smartest person in the room. He came in around noon, stayed maybe 20 minutes, and spent most of it on his phone just inside the doorway. I could hear both ends of the conversation clearly enough to piece it together. "Yeah, the timeline's tighter than I thought," he said. His voice dropped to the particular low register men use when they think they're being discreet. "The old man's hanging on longer than no, I know. Listen, the asset transfer framework is ready. I just need the trigger event." A pause. "Yeah. Keep the Kierland deal on hold until I confirm. Should be soon. The trigger event." I turned that phrase over in my mind like a stone in my palm. In 27 years of running a construction company, I knew exactly what trigger event meant in a contract context. It meant a specific condition that had to be satisfied before an action could take place. The condition was my death. The action was Ryan taking everything I had built. That evening, he came back with Diana. They sat in the two chairs beside my bed. I could hear the specific creak of the vinyl upholstery that I'd come to memorize over 4 days, and they talked the way people talk when they've decided a decision is already made. "The accountant called," Diana said, her voice lower than usual. "Walter asked about the Q3 transfers again. He left 2 messages. Ryan's exhale was sharp and dismissive. "Walter Pruitt is a problem I've already handled once. I'll handle it again. He's been with the company 12 years, Ryan. James trusts him." "James," Ryan said, not Dad. James, like I was a third party in the conversation, isn't in a position to trust anyone right now. Walter's a number cruncher with a hero complex. I'll move him to compliance review, give him a stack of old files to audit, and he'll be too busy to ask questions that aren't his to ask. Diana made a sound something between agreement and unease. "Just be careful. He keeps records." "Everyone keeps records," Ryan said. "The question is whether anyone ever looks at them." I filed 2 things away in that moment. The name Walter Pruitt, and the fact that Ryan was afraid of what Walter might have already found. Day 5 brought Diana alone mid-morning, when the hallway outside was loud, with the sounds of a shift change and a lunch cart rattling past. She sat beside me for a long time without speaking. I could hear her breathing, could almost feel the weight of whatever she was working through. Then, very quietly, so quietly, I had to strain to catch it through the beeping of the monitors, she said, "I'm sorry, James. I want you to know that I am sorry." She reached out and took my hand the first time anyone had held my hand since I'd been in that room. My heart felt like it was tearing in 2 directions at once. Part of me wanted to grip her fingers back, wanted to believe that apology was for something she could still undo. But I had already heard too much by then. The apology landed in me like a stone dropping into deep water, true maybe, and still sinking through something too dark and too cold for it to reach the bottom. She stayed another 10 minutes and left without saying anything else. Day 6, early morning. Before the regular staff arrived, before the hall noise picked up in that particular quiet of a hospital at 6:30, Ryan came in alone. I heard his footsteps, unhurried, deliberate. The chair didn't scrape. He didn't sit. He just stood there, and the silence stretched out long enough that I thought maybe he'd changed his mind about saying whatever he'd come to say. Then low and almost conversational, like a man thinking out loud to an empty room. "You know what the funny thing is, old man? You did everything right. Built the whole thing from scratch. Trusted the right people, made the right calls, worked every angle like the textbook said. You handed me a seat at that table before I'd earned a single day of it." He took a slow breath. "And you never once stopped to wonder whether I actually wanted to sit there or whether I wanted the whole table." My jaw ached from clenching it. "You built something great," Ryan said. "Too bad you won't be around to watch me take it." He left 30 seconds later, unhurried, casual. A man who believed with complete certainty that the hardest part was already done. I lay in the dark behind my own eyelids and felt something I had not expected to feel in that moment. Not rage, not devastation, but a slow and granite-hard clarity. The kind that doesn't shake, doesn't waver, doesn't ask to be talked out of itself. My son had just told me exactly who he was. The least I could do was believe him. Somewhere in the building, a cart rattled down a corridor. A nurse laughed at something down the hall. The monitors beside me kept their steady rhythm, proof of life evidence of a fact my family had already decided to ignore. Walter Pruitt. The name sat in my mind like a compass needle pointing somewhere I hadn't been yet, toward something Ryan very much didn't want me to find. I didn't know yet what Walter knew or what he'd kept, but Ryan had mentioned that name twice in 4 days, and both times there'd been that edge in his voice, the particular edge of a man who's spent considerable energy keeping a door locked and has just heard someone try the handle from the other side. On the morning of the 7th day, something cracked open inside my chest, not painfully, not gradually, but all at once like a fist hitting a wall of ice from the inside. My right hand moved first, just the fingers curling slowly against the sheet. Then my jaw shifted. Then my eyelids, heavy as wet concrete, dragged themselves apart by what felt like sheer stubbornness alone. The light was blinding, white ceiling tiles, fluorescent strips, the pale green curtain half drawn across the window. I blinked 4 times before any of it made sense. Then a voice cut through the blur. Oh my God, he's awake!" A woman's voice, high and startled footsteps scrambling. Patricia, her name badge read when she leaned over me, eyes wide and bright, with something that looked very close to tears. "Mr. Caldwell, can you hear me? Squeeze my hand if you can hear me." I squeezed her hand so hard she gasped. "I hear you," I said. My voice came out like gravel dragged over concrete, raw and cracked and barely recognizable. But it came out. The next 20 minutes were controlled chaos. A doctor appeared. Penlight in my eyes, questions fired one after another. What year is it? Who is the current president? Can you tell me your full name? Can you follow my finger? I answered every question correctly. But I was careful to let my responses come out slower than my mind was actually moving. Careful to let my eyes look a little more unfocused than they actually were, careful to perform the version of James Caldwell, who had just clawed his way back from the edge, rather than the version who had spent 6 days cataloging every word his family had said over his body. Let them think the machine was right about me. Let them think I was still catching up. The doctor patted my arm and said, "You're a tough one, Mr. Caldwell. We'll run some more checks, but this is very good news." He turned to the nurse. "Call the family." The word family landed in my gut like a dropped wrench. 20 minutes later, Diana walked through that door. And here is the thing I was not prepared for. The thing that knocked the breath out of me harder than the truck had. There was relief on her face. Real relief. Not performed, not calculated, not the kind a guilty person manufactures to cover something uglier. Her eyes filled the moment she saw mine open, her hand flew to her mouth, and when she crossed the room and wrapped both arms around my shoulders, the sob that came out of her was ragged and genuine, and absolutely broke my heart clean in half, because it didn't change anything. And I knew it didn't change anything. And that knowing made the grief twice as sharp. "James," she whispered against my shoulder, her voice cracking around my name. "James." I was so scared. I kept telling myself you were going to wake up. You had to wake up. I wrapped my arm around her. I pressed my hand against her hair, the way I had 10,000 times before. And I said, "I know, I'm so lucky to have you. I'm so lucky to have." Every syllable of that sentence was a lie, and I delivered it without flinching. She pulled back after a long moment, wiping her face with the back of her wrist, laughing a little through the tears, the way people do when emotion runs into relief too fast. "You look terrible," she said. "I feel worse," I said, which was the first true thing I'd said to her in 7 days. She laughed again and squeezed my hand and turned toward the door as Ryan stepped in behind her. My son looked good. Rested, actually. Sharp in a collared shirt, a little color in his face, carrying himself with the easy confidence of a man who'd had several uninterrupted nights of sleep. He crossed the room with his arms already open and pulled me into a hug that was all warmth and grip and the particular performance of relief. "Dad," he said against my shoulder, voice thick with something that might have been emotion, "you scared us half to death." "I'm tougher than I look," I said. He pulled back and looked at me, looked, eyes moving across my face like he was searching for something. And for just a half second, buried underneath the smile and the warmth and the son who was scared, I saw it. A flicker, a recalculation. The micro-expression of a man whose plan has just encountered an unexpected variable, gone in an instant, replaced by the grin. "You really are," he said, and clapped me on the shoulder. "Don't ever do that again." "I'll do my best," I told him. They stayed another hour. Diana held my hand and talked about small things, what the neighbors had said. How Patricia, the nurse, had been wonderful, how she'd barely slept. Ryan sat in the chair by the window and scrolled his phone with his thumb while he talked, telling me the office was running smoothly, that I shouldn't think about work, that everything was handled. I watched him scroll and smiled and said, "Thank you, son," in all the right places. When they finally left, I turned my head toward the window. Outside, the Arizona sun was doing what it always did, burning through everything indifferent and clean, leaving nothing soft behind. I had never been more grateful for it. I took one long breath, then another. They had spent 6 days deciding I was gone. I had spent 6 days deciding what I was going to do about it. The answer was not a phone call to the police, not yet. A complaint filed too early without evidence against a son with access to company attorneys and 22 months of preparation behind him would give Ryan exactly the time he needed to disappear everything. I needed documents. I needed names. I needed the kind of case that didn't leave a single exit door open. And now the clock, the one that actually mattered, had officially started. They sent me home 2 days later. Ryan held the car door open. Diana had fresh flowers on the kitchen counter. And somewhere in the house on Canyon Ridge Drive, the life they had been quietly rearranging was waiting for me to step back into it. I had every intention of doing exactly that, just not in the way any of them expected. Ryan held the car door open with both hands and a smile so wide it could have meant anything. "Welcome home, Dad," he said. I stepped out of the passenger seat onto the driveway of Canyon Ridge Drive and stood there for a moment, letting the October air hit my face dry and warm and carrying that specific desert smell of heated rock and distant rain that I had always loved about Arizona. The house looked exactly the same. Red clay tile roof, the big saguaro in the front yard that had been there when we bought the property, the double glass front doors that Diana had insisted on and I had secretly loved. Everything the same, nothing the same. "You okay?" Diana asked, touching my elbow gently. Her eyes searching my face with the focused attention of a woman who had been watching me carefully since the hospital. "Better every minute," I said and let her guide me inside. The kitchen smelled like something had been cooking for hours, one of those slow roasted meals Diana made when she wanted the house to feel warm. Fresh flowers on the counter, yellow ones in a clear vase. The kind of careful effort that said, "We want you to feel cared for." And maybe they did in their own way. Maybe that's what made the whole thing so exhausting, to navigate the fact that not everything was false. Some of it was just complicated, which is almost worse. Ryan set my bag down near the stairs and turned to me with his hands in his pockets and that particular relaxed authority that had been creeping into his posture for months. "Don't even think about the office," he said. "Everything's handled. The Morrison contract got pushed to next quarter. The Kierland project is moving, and I've had daily check-ins with the site managers. You just focus on getting your strength back." "I appreciate that, son," I said. "I really do." He nodded like a man accepting something he was owed and headed for the kitchen. I excused myself to lie down the doctor's orders, I said, which was true enough to serve. I went upstairs, closed the bedroom door, and instead of lying down, I opened the laptop I kept on the desk near the window. My personal machine, the one Ryan didn't have administrative access to, or so I believed. I opened the company network log. Every account that accessed our internal systems left a trace IP address timestamp duration. I'd built that into the architecture years ago, back when a project manager had walked off with client data, and I'd spent 2 weeks piecing together what happened from memory instead of record. Never again. I scrolled back 6 weeks. Ryan's IP showed up 43 times outside of standard business hours. His office machine in the building fine. He worked late, that was normal. But there were also 17 entries from a residential address in North Scottsdale. His apartment. Accessing the trust structure documents, the asset register, the shareholder agreement, the buy-sell provisions, the foundational documents of Caldwell Construction Group, the ones that governed what happened to the company if the primary owner became incapacitated or died. My hands felt suddenly cold against the keyboard. He hadn't been studying the business to run it better. He'd been studying it the way a locksmith studies a lock before cutting a key. My phone buzzed on the desk. Unknown number, then I recognized it. Marcus Webb, my business partner of 12 years, the man who had been in the trench with me on every major deal since 2013. Marcus and I had an understanding that didn't require a lot of words to function, which was one of the things I valued most about him. "James," he said when I picked up. His voice was careful in a way Marcus's voice almost never was. Marcus was a direct man. Direct men get careful when something is making them uneasy. "I'm glad you're home. I'm glad you're alive." "So am I," said. "What's wrong?" A pause, short but audible. "I've been sitting on something for about 3 months," he said. I didn't say anything because honestly, I thought I might be reading too much into it. But after everything that happened, I think you need to hear it. I leaned forward in the chair, spine straightening. "Go ahead." "Ryan came to see me in July," Marcus said. "Said you wanted him to get more familiar with the business architecture. Asked me a lot of questions: asset structure, ownership thresholds. What happens operationally if a principal is suddenly out of the picture?" His voice tightened around that last phrase. I gave him general answers. But James, the questions weren't general. They were specific. The kind of specific that comes from knowing exactly what you're looking for. My jaw tightened until my back teeth ached, and then, Marcus continued, he asked me something that's been sitting wrong with me ever since. He asked whether you'd done any estate planning updates recently, whether the company assets were fully integrated into your personal will. A beat. I told him I didn't know. He said, "Just curious," and changed the subject. The room felt smaller than it had 60 seconds ago. "Marcus," I said, keeping my voice even and low, "I need you to keep this conversation between us. Can you do that?" "Already have been," Marcus said, and the steadiness in his voice made my chest loosen by exactly 1 degree. "James, what do you need?" I looked out the bedroom window at the McDowell Mountains going orange in the late afternoon light, at the city I had spent 27 years building something inside of, and I felt a decision crystallize in the way decisions only do when you've already known the answer and were just waiting for the right question to make it visible. "Not yet," I said, "but I will, soon." I ended the call and sat there with the laptop still open, Ryan's access log still on the screen. July. He had started preparing in July. The accident was in October. 3 months of research, 3 months of quiet groundwork, 3 months of asking exactly the right questions of exactly the right people. This wasn't impulse. This wasn't opportunism. This was architecture. And the man who had built it had spent the last 9 days bringing me soup and holding car doors open and calling me dad. I needed someone completely outside the circle, a lawyer Ryan had never heard of, had never met, had no way to reach or influence or charm. I needed someone who would look at what I had and tell me the truth without flinching. I picked up my phone and called an old college friend I hadn't spoken to in 8 months. I told him I needed a referral. I told him it was urgent. and I told him under no circumstances to mention my name to anyone. The first time I drove myself since the accident, I took Scottsdale Road south out of Desert Mountain, same route I'd driven 1,000 times before. Everything was fine until I hit the intersection at Camelback. My foot hit the brake before my brain told it to, a full second before the light even changed my right leg, going rigid and heavy like something had shorted out between my spine and my shoe. My knuckles went white on the steering wheel. My heart slammed against my ribs hard enough to feel it in my throat. I sat there, with the car stopped at a green light, while the pickup behind me laid on his horn, and I breathed through my nose until the shaking in my hands settled down to something manageable. Then I pulled through the intersection and kept driving. Some things you don't get to skip, I told myself. You just get to survive them and keep moving. Howard Slack's office on Pima Road didn't advertise itself. No brass nameplate by the door, no marble lobby, no receptionist with a headset and a rehearsed smile. What it had was a plain wooden door on the second floor of a building that mostly housed a dental practice and an insurance broker, and behind that door, a man who had spent 30 years making very serious problems disappear very quietly for people who could afford his specific kind of quiet. My college friend had given me Howard's number with 3 words, "Don't waste his time." I didn't intend to. Howard Slack was 57 years old, built like a man who had once been an athlete and hadn't entirely let it go, with gray at his temples and eyes that processed information the way security cameras do, constantly, without expression, missing nothing. He stood when I walked in, shook my hand, with a grip that meant something, and gestured to the chair across from his desk. "James Caldwell," he said, sitting back down. "I read about the accident. I'm glad you're upright." "So am I," I said. "I need to know if my son is stealing from me, and I need you to operate on the assumption that the answer is yes." Howard looked at me for exactly 3 seconds without blinking. Then he said, "Tell me everything." So I did. I started from the moment I heard Ryan's voice in the ICU, and I didn't stop for 40 minutes. The DNR. The trigger event phone call. Walter Pruitt's name coming up twice with that particular edge in Ryan's voice. The IP logs on my personal laptop, 43 after-hours accesses to the company's foundational documents over 6 weeks. Marcus Webb's phone call about Ryan's questions in July. All of it laid out in sequence the way I'd been arranging it in my head for 10 days. Howard listened without interrupting once. He didn't take notes. He just watched my face with those camera eyes and absorbed every word. When I finished, he leaned forward with his elbows on the desk and said, "The name Walter Pruitt. You said Ryan wanted to handle him. What's Pruitt's position?" "Walter Pruitt. The man Ryan had tried to bury in archival files and silence with a reassignment. 12 years of institutional knowledge and apparently 12 years of keeping receipts." Howard typed something, looked at his screen, typed again. Then he said, "He filed 2 internal compliance reports last year. Both were dismissed." He looked up. "By Ryan Caldwell." My chest went hot and tight all at once. "I didn't know that," I said, and the words came out rougher than I intended. "The reports are still in the system," Howard said, "marked resolved. But the underlying transactions they flagged, those are still there too. James, I'm looking at your Q3 vendor payment register right now, and I'm seeing line items that don't match any contractor on your active roster." He turned the laptop screen toward me. "See this Pinnacle Development Services LLC, paid $62,000 in September. Do you recognize that company?" I leaned forward and stared at the screen. My stomach dropped like a stone off a bridge. "No," I said. "I've never heard of it. I need 48 hours with full access to your financial systems," Howard said, closing the laptop with a quiet click. "What I'm seeing right now is the surface. I want to know what's underneath it." He leaned back. "And James, I want you to find a way to talk to Walter Pruitt. Not through the office, not through email, not through anything Ryan might have visibility into. Off the books, off the grid. Can you do that? Yes, I said. Then do it before the end of the week. I drove home with a name in my mouth. Pinnacle Development Services, LLC, and the particular sick feeling of a man who has spent the better part of 3 decades building something real and is only now beginning to understand how long someone else has been quietly taking it apart. Howard said 48 hours. I gave him 36, and then I drove to Old Town Scottsdale at 7 in the morning, with a burner phone in my jacket pocket, and a meeting that I had arranged with 4 words texted to a number Walter Pruitt had given no one but me back in 2019 for emergencies. I had never used it until now. I hoped he still had the same phone. Old Town Scottsdale. At 7 in the morning is a different city than it is at noon. The tourist energy hasn't woken up yet. The galleries are still dark, the restaurant patios empty, the boutique hotels quiet. What's left is the real city underneath delivery trucks double parked on Main Street. A dog walker moving fast along the canal path, the smell of coffee drifting out of the handful of places that open early for people who actually live here rather than visit. I chose the corner table facing the door, ordered a black coffee I didn't particularly want, and watched the entrance. Walter Pruitt walked in at 7:29, 1 minute early, which told me exactly what I needed to know about his state of mind. Men who are relaxed show up on time. Men who are worried show up early. He was 52 years old, medium build, the kind of face that disappears in a crowd, which I had always suspected was an asset in his line of work. He wore a gray jacket over a collared shirt, moved quietly through the tables, and when he spotted me, he came straight over without hesitation, the walk of a man who has been waiting a long time for this particular conversation. He sat down across from me, wrapped both hands around the coffee cup the server had just set in front of him, and looked at me with eyes that were red at the edges like he hadn't been sleeping enough. "Mr. Caldwell," he said. His voice was low and careful. "I'm glad you're alive." "Walter," I said, "tell me what you know." He exhaled slowly through his nose, the breath of a man releasing something he'd been carrying for a long time, and reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He set a USB drive on the table between us. Small, black nothing written on it. "I kept copies," he said, his fingers still resting lightly on the drive. "Every time I found something that didn't add up, I backed it up on this before I filed the internal reports. I didn't know if I'd ever need it, but something told me not to throw it away." I looked at the drive, then at Walter. "How long have you known?" His jaw tightened. 18 months. Maybe longer if I'm honest with myself. The first time I saw a Pinnacle Development Services invoice, I thought it was a data entry error. Wrong vendor code, maybe a duplicate from a legitimate job. So I checked. He pushed the USB the final inch across the table toward me, and his hand was trembling, a fine, barely visible tremor that he couldn't quite control. "It wasn't an error." "Walk me through it," I said. Walter leaned forward, his voice dropping to just above a murmur. "Pinnacle Development Services, LLC is registered in Nevada. No website, no physical address beyond a registered agent mailbox in Las Vegas. No employees on any state payroll record. But between 22 months ago and last month, Caldwell Construction Group has paid Pinnacle a total of approximately $840,000. He swallowed hard. "That's just Pinnacle. There are 4 other entities I found with the same profile. Shell companies, all of them. I can't prove they're all connected to the same person from the outside, but the payment patterns are identical amounts just below the threshold that triggers automatic audit flags timed at irregular intervals to avoid pattern detection." My throat felt like someone had poured concrete down it. "What's the total?" I asked. Walter's eyes met mine and held there. "From what I can document, approximately $2.3 million over 22 months. He blinked, and his eyes went glassy for just a moment, before he pulled himself back. "Mr. Caldwell, I tried to stop it. I filed the first compliance report 14 months ago with everything I had." Ryan called me into his office the next morning. His voice cracked slightly on Ryan's name. He sat across from me and smiled and said, "Walter, you're one of the best we have, but you need to stay in your lane. This is above your pay grade." And then a week later, I was reassigned to archival review. 8 hours a day of filing documents from 2009. My hands curled around my coffee cup, hard enough to feel the ceramic strain. "The second report," I said. 3 months later. I had more by then, more entities, more transactions, a cleaner timeline. I sent it directly to the compliance officer. Walter's mouth pressed into a thin, bitter line. "The compliance officer reports to Ryan." The air went out of the room. "Why didn't you come to me directly?" I asked. Walter looked down at his coffee. His knuckles tightened around the cup, and when he looked back up, his eyes were bright with something that looked a lot like shame. "Because it's your son, Mr. Caldwell. And I've watched you with him for 12 years. I've watched you defend him in meetings, promote him over people who worked twice as hard, talk about him like he was the future of everything you built." His voice dropped to almost nothing. "I was afraid you'd look at me, a man you barely notice in the hallway, and choose him. And then I'd have nothing left, no evidence, no job, no way to prove any of it." That one hit me somewhere deep and specific, like a finger pressing on a bruise I hadn't known was there. "I believe you, Walter," I said. Every word. His shoulders dropped about 2 inches, the physical release of a weight he'd been carrying alone for over a year. He pressed the back of his hand to his mouth and blinked rapidly, fighting back something that was threatening to break through. "There's more on the drive," he said when he'd steadied himself. "Copies of the flagged invoices, the payment records, the entity registration documents I was able to pull from public records. It's not everything, but it's enough to show the shape of it." I picked up the USB and put it in my jacket pocket. "You did the right thing keeping this," I told him. "And you're going to be okay. I promise you that." Walter left first. I sat with my cold coffee and a number that kept expanding the longer I turned it over, 2.3 million. And that was only what Walter could see from his position. Howard had full access to the entire system. I drove straight to Pima Road. Whatever Howard had found in 36 hours, I was ready to hear it. Or so I told myself. Howard called me on a Friday morning while Diana was at her yoga class. As that detail, Diana at yoga, consistent as clockwork every Tuesday and Friday since I'd come home, had stopped registering as routine about 48 hours after I got out of the hospital. Now it registered as data. Everything registered as data. "Come in," Howard said when I picked up, "and sit down before I show you anything." I was in his office on Pima Road 22 minutes later. The folder on his desk was twice as thick as it had been 3 days ago. He had a second monitor set up beside his laptop, both screens running, and the look on his face was the particular expression of a man who has spent 36 hours confirming something he wishes he hadn't found. He didn't offer coffee. He didn't ask how I was feeling. He just opened the folder and said, $2.7 million. The air went out of my lungs like I'd taken a hit to the sternum. "Walter estimated 2.3, I said when I could speak. Walter could only see what touched his department, Howard said. I had the whole system. The additional 400,000 moved through your commercial real estate subsidiary, a separate accounting structure that Walter didn't have visibility into." He turned the laptop screen toward me. 22 months, Ryan built a network of 6 shell entities, not 5, all registered in Nevada or Delaware, all using the same payment fragmentation strategy, amounts structured just under your internal audit thresholds, so nothing triggered automatically. I stared at the numbers on the screen. Column after column of payments that looked at a glance like ordinary operating costs. Vendor invoices, subcontractor fees, materials procurement. Each one just plausible enough that a busy executive reviewing monthly summaries would see what he expected to see and move on. I had moved on. For 22 months I had moved on. The signatures, I said, my voice coming out flat and controlled in a way that cost me something. Tell me about the signatures. Howard's expression shifted just slightly, just enough. He closed the laptop and laced his fingers together on the desk. Diana has co-ownership signing authority on the Caldwell Construction Group business accounts, he said carefully. That's a standard arrangement in family-owned enterprises. It allows operations to continue if one partner is temporarily unavailable. He paused. 43 of the fraudulent transactions required a second signature to process. Diana's signature appears on all 43. My jaw locked so tight I could feel it in my back teeth. She initiated any of them, I asked. Diana's role was authorization. She signed what was put in front of her. Ryan was careful about how he framed them. Routine vendor approvals, standard subcontractor releases, the kind of paperwork that crosses a spouse's desk when a company runs at the pace Caldwell Construction ran. Nothing that looked unusual on its face. Everything that was catastrophic underneath it. The room felt smaller than it had a minute ago. Smaller and colder. I thought about Diana at her yoga class right now, moving through poses in a studio, somewhere on Scottsdale Road, drinking her green tea after driving home to make sure dinner was ready before I got back. 29 years. 3 decades of mornings and arguments and anniversaries, and the specific comfort of knowing someone so well, you stop noticing them the way you notice furniture in a room you've lived in too long. 43 signatures. James. Howard's voice pulled me back. There's more. I looked up at him and something in my chest braced itself. Go ahead. Ryan spent 4 months studying the legal mechanics of what happens to Caldwell Construction Group in the event of your death or incapacitation, Howard said. He was thorough. He identified every asset tied to your personal will, mapped out the probate timeline, researched the process for transferring operational control. He held my gaze steady. And then he filed 2 internal board resolutions unilaterally, without calling a formal board meeting, without notifying any other stakeholders, that designated himself as acting primary authority for all company decisions in the event you were, quote, unable to fulfill your duties. Those resolutions aren't valid, I said. Our operating agreement requires a quorum. They're not valid, Howard confirmed. But they exist in the company's internal filing system backdated to August. And if you had died in that hospital, and if no one had looked closely at the paperwork in the first chaotic weeks of settling an estate, those resolutions might have functioned as authority long enough to do significant damage. He straightened the folder on his desk. Ryan was betting on chaos and grief to buy him the window he needed. I stood up from the chair, walked to the window, and pressed my palm flat against the glass. Outside, Pima Road was doing its ordinary Friday morning business cars, deliveries, a woman walking a dog on the sidewalk below. Everything ordinary. Everything completely unchanged. My son had spent 22 months hollowing out the company I built. My wife had signed her name to it 43 times. And they had both been sitting at my dinner table passing the salt, asking about my recovery. What do we do next? I asked without turning from the window. We keep building the case, Howard said. Clean, documented, airtight. When we move once and we don't miss. I drove home with the kind of quiet in my head that doesn't mean peace. It means everything has gone still because the mind has hit something too large to process all at once and is simply working around it the way water works around a rock. Howard said there was more to discuss, things that needed another day to confirm. I told him I'd be back Monday. And then I went home and had dinner with my wife and told her the salmon was delicious. Howard told me to come back Monday. I was sitting in his office at 8:15 Monday morning, coffee, untouched coat still on. He looked at me across the desk the way he'd looked at me that first day, steady, direct, no softening around the edges. Then he picked up a single printed page from the corner of his desk and held it out toward me. Read the highlighted section first, he said. I took the page. It was a contract, a business acquisition agreement formatted in the standard language I'd read 100 times across 27 years of deals. Buyer-seller terms, conditions. My eyes went straight to the yellow highlight near the bottom of the first page. This agreement shall become effective and binding upon the confirmed death or court-declared permanent incapacitation of James Robert Caldwell, current primary owner of Caldwell Construction Group, LLC. I read it twice. Then I looked at the signature block. Ryan Thomas Caldwell, signing as acting authorized representative, Caldwell Construction Group, LLC. Date October 19th, 2025. Day 5. He had signed this on day 5 of my time in the ICU, 2 days after Diana had put her name on the DNR. 1 day after I'd heard him say trigger event into his phone. My hands did not shake. I want to be clear about that. My hands were completely steady as I set that page back down on Howard's desk. But something behind my sternum felt like it was coming apart at the seams, slowly, quietly, the way a seam does when the thread has been under tension too long. Is this legally binding? I asked. Absolutely not, Howard said, and there was a firmness in his voice that I held onto like a railing. Ryan had no power of attorney, no court order, no board resolution that would survive legal scrutiny. He had no authority to sign anything on behalf of the company. In legal terms, this contract is void ab initio, meaning it was never valid from the moment he put pen to paper. He leaned forward. But James, think about what this tells us. This document was not thrown together in a hospital waiting room. The formatting, the legal language, the specific conditions, this was drafted by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. This was ready and waiting. He had a lawyer, I said. Someone prepared this for him, Howard confirmed. I'm working on tracing the drafting attorney. That thread is still open. I stood up and walked to the window, the same window I'd stood at 3 days ago, and this time I didn't press my hand against the glass. I just stood there and breathed. How close did he come? I asked. If I had died in that hospital, how close did he actually come to pulling this off? Howard was quiet for a moment, and in that moment I understood that he was choosing his words with the care of a man who respects the person he's talking to enough to tell them the truth. Close, he said. In the first weeks after a death, especially a sudden one, estates move through a period of administrative chaos. Grieving families make decisions quickly. Paperwork gets filed before anyone looks at it carefully. If Ryan had moved fast, and everything we've seen suggests he would have this contract, might have functioned as de facto authority long enough to complete a sale before any attorney or probate court had a chance to examine it properly. He paused. He was counting on no one looking too hard, too fast. The cold in my chest spread outward to my fingers. You said there was something else, I said. About the assets. Yes. Howard turned back to his desk and opened the folder to a tabbed section near the back. Ryan mapped your will extensively. He knew every asset tied to your personal estate, the Canyon Ridge property, the company shares, the investment accounts. He built his entire strategy around controlling those assets. He looked up. What he doesn't know, what he apparently never found, is the Caldwell family irrevocable trust. I turned from the window. An irrevocable trust, Howard continued, is a legal structure entirely separate from your will. Assets placed inside it don't belong to your personal estate. They belong to the trust itself. They don't go through probate when you die. They're not accessible to anyone attacking your will or your estate. They're governed solely by the trust document and its designated trustee. He held my gaze. You placed your most significant assets into that trust 11 years ago, including your majority stake in Caldwell Construction Group, the 4 commercial land parcels in the East Valley, and your private investment portfolio. James Ryan spent months studying how to take everything you had. He was studying the wrong documents the entire time. Something shifted in my chest, not warmth exactly, but the specific sensation of a foundation holding under pressure that was designed to break it. He never asked about the trust, I said. He didn't know to ask, Howard said, and no one told him. I sat back down, picked up my coffee for the first time. It was cold, but I drank it anyway, because I needed something to do with my hands, while my mind caught up with what I'd just been told. My son had spent 22 months building an elaborate machine designed to strip me of everything I'd made. He'd studied the locks, cut the keys, positioned himself at every door. And the room that held the things that actually mattered most, he'd never even found the hallway. Howard, I said, setting down the cup, I want everything documented. Every transaction, every shell company, every fraudulent signature, every board resolution, that contract, all of it. I want a case that doesn't have a single loose thread. Howard nodded once. Already building it. And I need one more thing, I said. I need to know about the accident itself. Howard's eyes sharpened. What about it? Eddie Vargas, the truck driver. He called the non-emergency police line 4 days after the crash and tried to add information to his statement. The follow-up never happened. I looked at Howard steadily. I want to know why. And I want to know what he was going to say. Howard wrote the name down. I drove home on autopilot, and somewhere on the Pima Road on-ramp, my phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. Dinner Sunday, Mom wants the whole family together. I read it at the red light. Then I put the phone face down on the passenger seat and focused on the road ahead. There was one more person I needed to bring into this, and unlike Howard, this one worked out of an office that hadn't been redecorated since the previous decade. There is a particular kind of professional that thrives on being underestimated. Dennis Cruz was that kind of professional. His office in East Scottsdale sat above a dry cleaning shop on a street that didn't show up in any business district directory, which I suspected was entirely by design. The staircase going up was narrow, and the door at the top had a frosted glass panel with his name in plain black lettering. No title, no credentials listed, nothing to tell a passing stranger what went on inside. I had asked my college friend for someone discreet. He had given me someone who had made discretion into an art form. Dennis Cruz was 49 years old, lean and unhurried, with the kind of stillness that comes from 20 years of watching people without being watched back. He had a forgettable gray sedan parked out front, and an office that hadn't been touched by an interior decorator since the previous decade, and when I walked through the door, he was already standing, hand extended, with the specific attentiveness of a man who had read everything my college friend had told him and formed preliminary conclusions before I'd said a word. Mr. Caldwell, he said. Sit down. Tell me where you want to start. The accident, I said, settling into the chair across from his desk. And then my wife, in that order. Dennis sat back down, pulled a yellow legal pad across the desk, and uncapped a pen. The accident first, then. Walk me through what you know about a man named Eddie Vargas. I told him everything Howard had found. The non-emergency police call, the addendum, that was never followed up, the note in the file about a distraction on Vargas's phone right before the intersection. Dennis wrote without looking down at the pad, keeping his eyes on my face the entire time. When I finished, he said, "The traffic camera footage from that intersection, have you seen it?" "No," I said. "Howard requested it. We're still waiting." Something moved across Dennis's face, too quick to call an expression, more like a calculation, completing itself. "I'll request it through a separate channel," he said. "Independently. If the footage shows what I think it might show, I want 2 clean chains of custody, not 1. He made a note. Eddie Vargas. Mesa address construction worker, clean record, apart from 2 minor traffic citations. He tried to add to his statement 4 days after the accident and got a junior officer who filed it as supplemental and never escalated it. His jaw tightened slightly. That happens more than it should. Can you find him? I asked. Already have his address, Dennis said without inflection. I'll approach him carefully. If he's scared and my read is that he is, or he wouldn't have called that non-emergency line, then he needs to feel safe before he'll talk. He set the pen down. Now, your wife. I told him about Diana, about the yoga schedule that had become too consistent to be accidental, about the Tuesday and Thursday mornings that had somehow stretched from 90 minutes to 3 hours without explanation, about the way she'd started keeping her phone face down on the kitchen counter, a habit she'd never had in 29 years of marriage. Dennis listened, the way he'd listened to everything else, completely still, completely present, absorbing it all without reaction. "What do you need from me specifically?" he asked. "I need to know who she's seeing," I said. "How long? How serious? And whether it connects to anything else that's been happening." Dennis nodded once. "Timeline for results. As fast as you can move without being noticed. 5 to 7 days, he said. He picked the pen back up. "One more thing, Mr. Caldwell. The person who approached Vargas, if Vargas was indeed approached and set up, they would have needed to know your schedule, your route home, your departure time, your habits." He held my gaze carefully. "That's a very short list of people." My throat felt like it had been lined with gravel. "I know," I said. "I want you to be prepared," Dennis said, and his voice was quiet in the way that precedes something difficult, for the possibility that what happened on that intersection was not entirely accidental. I drove home on Scottsdale Road, through the exact intersection where the truck had hit me, and this time my foot didn't flinch on the brake. This time I went through at a steady 35 miles an hour, and felt something colder and more deliberate than fear settle into the base of my spine. Not accidental. I had been thinking about theft, about money and company shares and forged documents, and a son who had spent months studying how to take what I'd built. I had not let myself think about the other possibility, the one that started with a phone buzzing in a truck driver's hand at exactly the wrong moment on exactly the right road. I wasn't ready to think it out loud yet, but the thought was there now, and it wasn't going anywhere. Dennis said 5 to 7 days. He called me in 4. I was sitting on the back patio of Canyon Ridge Drive on a Monday morning, coffee in hand, watching the desert floor catch the first light of the day, the way it always did, slowly, then all at once. When my phone buzzed with his number, Diana had left for yoga 40 minutes earlier. I picked up on the first ring. "We're about halfway through and things are about to get a lot darker. If you're still here, type 'still here' in the comments. I want to know who's writing this out with me." The McDowell Mountains at 6:50 in the morning look like they've been painted onto the sky, rust and amber and deep purple shadow, the kind of color that exists for about 20 minutes before the full Arizona sun bleaches everything back to gold. I had my coffee. I had my phone. I had the particular stillness of a man who has been waiting for a call he both needs and dreads. Dennis picked up on the second ring. "I have what you asked for," he said. His voice was its usual flat professional register, but underneath it, just barely, was something careful. The tone of a man delivering information he knows will land hard. "You want the full report or the short version first?" "Short version," I said, then full. "His name is Christopher Lane, 41 years old. Architect licensed in Arizona, works out of a firm on North Scottsdale Road, about 4 blocks from your office building." A beat. Diana has been seeing him for 14 months. The coffee cup in my hand stopped halfway to my mouth. 14 months. "How serious?" I asked, and my voice came out steadier than I had any right to expect. "Serious enough that it's not casual," Dennis said. "They meet Tuesday and Thursday mornings, the yoga schedule. There's a hotel on Camelback Road they use consistently. 14 months, Mr. Caldwell. That's not an impulse. That's a decision someone made and kept making over and over again." I set the coffee cup down on the patio table. My hand was not entirely steady. When I did it, a slight tremor in my fingers that I felt more than saw, like a fault line shifting somewhere deep. 14 months ago, I said, more to myself than to Dennis. "What month does that put the start at?" "August of last year," Dennis said. "Give or take 2 weeks." August of last year. I did the math without wanting to. In August of last year, Diana and I had gone to Marcus Webb's birthday dinner at a steakhouse in Old Town Scottsdale. She'd worn a black dress. She'd ordered the sea bass and told me it was the best she'd ever had. She'd reached across the table at some point and squeezed my hand and said, "We should do this more often, just the two of us." 2 weeks later, apparently, she'd started meeting Christopher Lane on Tuesday mornings. Something cold and nauseous moved through me from my chest down to my stomach, and for a long moment I gripped the arm of the patio chair with both hands, because the alternative was standing up, and I wasn't entirely sure my legs would hold me. The mountains in front of me blurred at the edges, not tears, just the body's way of registering a shock. It hasn't finished processing yet. "James." Dennis's voice came through the phone, quiet and direct. "You still there?" "I'm here," I said. My voice was rough. I cleared my throat. "Keep going. There's nothing in what I found that directly connects Lane to Ryan or to the financial situation at the company," Dennis said carefully. "As far as I can determine, he's not involved in anything beyond the personal relationship. But the timing, I said. "August. That's the same month Ryan began his research into the company asset structure based on what you told me from Marcus Webb's account." The nausea sharpened into something colder and more specific. I stood up from the chair because sitting felt suddenly intolerable, and I walked to the edge of the patio and stood there looking at the mountains with my jaw clenched so tight that a muscle under my ear had started to ache. 29 years. Not 29 bad years. I needed to be honest with myself about that. We had built something real together, Diana and I. We had sat across from each other at 1,000 dinners and laughed at things no one else would have understood, and navigated the brutal, ordinary difficulty of making a life side by side for 3 decades. That was real. I hadn't imagined it. But in August of last year, while I was working late on the Morrison project and coming home to reheated dinners and thinking, "We'll take that trip to Sedona in the spring," she had made a different decision and kept making it. Every Tuesday, every Thursday. 14 months of decisions stacking up like stones in a wall I hadn't known was being built until I walked into it face first. I pressed the back of my wrist against my mouth and breathed through my nose until the wave of it passed. It took longer than I wanted it to. "James," Dennis said again. "I hear you," I said. "The timing matters. August, Ryan starts researching the company structure. Diana starts seeing Lane. Same month." I pulled in a slow breath. I'm not ready to conclude that's coordinated, but I'm not willing to call it coincidence either. "That's a reasonable position," Dennis said. "Keep watching," I said. "Both of them. And Dennis, the Eddie Vargas angle. Where are we?" "I've made contact," Dennis said, and his voice shifted back into pure professional gear. "He's scared, but he wants to talk. I'm working on getting him to a place where he feels safe enough to say what he tried to say in that police addendum." A pause. "James, if what I think happened at that intersection is what actually happened, this case is about to get significantly larger than financial fraud." I stood at the edge of the patio and felt the morning sun hit my face for the first time that day, warm and indifferent and completely unchanged by any of it. My wife, my son. 14 months. 22 months. A truck on a Scottsdale road at exactly the right time. "I know," I said. "Keep moving." I went back inside and washed my face at the kitchen sink and stood there with cold water running over my wrists until my hands stopped trembling. Then I dried off, poured the cold coffee down the drain, and made a fresh cup. Diana would be home in 40 minutes. I needed to be the version of James Caldwell she expected to see, tired, recovering, grateful, oblivious. I had gotten very good at that version. Some days it scared me how good I'd gotten. I was pulling out of the Kierland Commons parking garage on a Wednesday afternoon when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then something instinct or the particular alertness that had been running under my skin like a low current for the past 4 weeks made me pick up. Mr. Caldwell. The voice on the other end was male mid-30s, carrying the specific weight of a man who hasn't been sleeping enough. My name is Eddie Vargas. Dennis Cruz gave me your number. He said you'd want to hear what I have to say. My foot went to the brake. I pulled back into a parking spot and cut the engine. Mr. Vargas, I said, I've been hoping you'd call. I need to talk to you in person, he said. Not on the phone. Somewhere public. A lot of people around. His breath was unsteady like a man trying to keep himself together through conscious effort alone. I'm not a bad person, Mr. Caldwell. I need you to know that before anything else. Pick somewhere, I said. I'll be there. He chose the parking lot of a Fry's grocery store on McDowell Road, busy enough that two men talking in a car would disappear into the background noise of shopping carts and engine starts. I got there first and waited. Eddie pulled up 8 minutes later in a work truck with a construction company logo on the door, the kind of vehicle that blended into any Arizona neighborhood without a second glance. He was 38 years old, compact and dark-haired, with calloused hands and the build of a man who spent his days doing physical work. When he climbed into the passenger seat of my car, I could see immediately that whatever he'd been carrying for the past several weeks had gotten heavy. His eyes were red at the rims, his jaw tight, his shoulders hunched inward like a man bracing against something only he could feel. Thank you for coming, I said. He nodded, staring through the windshield at the shopping carts lined up outside the store entrance. His hands gripped his knees. 3 weeks before your accident, he said, a man came up to me at a bar in Mesa. I was there after work, just having a beer, nothing unusual. He sat down next to me and bought me a drink, and we talked for a while, construction, the economy, the usual. He swallowed hard. Then he said he had a job for me. Simple surveillance, he called it. Follow a specific vehicle, he gave me the plate number, and report back on the schedule. What time it left a certain building on North Scottsdale Road. What route it took. What time it got home. My throat tightened. He paid you $500 cash, Eddie said, and his voice cracked slightly on the number. I thought it was, I know how it sounds now, but at the time I figured it was a divorce thing. A husband checking on a wife or the other way around. That kind of work. I didn't ask questions. He rubbed his face with both hands, dragging his palms down over his jaw. I needed the money. My daughter had a hospital bill, and I was short, and he was right there offering cash, and I said yes. What did you report back to him? His schedule, Eddie said. I watched the building for a week. The vehicle left most nights between 9 and 10. Always took Scottsdale Road south. Always turned onto the same residential route heading toward Desert Mountain. He stopped. A muscle in his jaw jumped. The night of the accident, he sent me a text. The message said I memorized it. I can't get it out of my head. It said he's leaving now. North entrance, Scottsdale Road south. His voice broke completely on the last 3 words, and he pressed his fist against his mouth and breathed through his nose for a long second. I was already on Scottsdale Road. I got the text right before the intersection. I looked down, just for a second. And then, Eddie, I kept my voice level with everything I had. What happened was not your fault. He shook his head violently. I was the one driving the truck, Mr. Caldwell. I was the one who looked at the phone. You were set up, I said. Someone put you on that road at that time on purpose. They knew that if they sent that text at exactly the right moment, there was a good chance you'd look. And they were right. My hands were pressed flat against my thighs, fingers spread, holding the anger down by sheer physical pressure. The person who did that, they're the one responsible, not you. Eddie's eyes went bright and wet, and he blinked rapidly, tilting his head back like a man trying to keep something from spilling over. I went to the police, he said. 4 days after. I tried to tell them, but the officer just took a note and said someone would follow up and nobody ever. I know, I said. Nobody followed up. That wasn't your fault either. Can you describe the man who approached you? I asked. Eddie described him late 40s or early 50s, well-dressed, expensive watch, dark hair, going silver at the sides. Paid in cash. No name given. The bar in Mesa was the kind of place that didn't have security cameras worth anything. Nothing traceable. Nothing that pointed anywhere specific. But it pointed somewhere general, and I already had a sense of the direction. Eddie, I said, I need you to write down everything you just told me, every detail you remember. Date, location, the exact wording of the text. Can you do that? He nodded, wiping his face with the back of his wrist. Yeah, I can do that. When you're done, send it to Dennis Cruz. He'll take care of it from there. I looked at him directly. You did the right thing calling me. He got out of my car, and I watched him walk back to his truck with the particular gait of a man who's put down something enormously heavy but isn't sure yet whether to feel relieved or terrified. I sat in the parking lot for 5 full minutes before I started the engine. Someone had known my schedule, my route, my departure time. The text had been sent with enough precision to catch me at exactly the right intersection. This had not been a plan assembled in a panic at a hospital bedside. This had been built before the accident, possibly long before. I called Dennis from the parking lot before I'd even pulled out of the space. He picked up before the second ring, and when I told him what Eddie had said, there was a pause on his end, short-controlled the pause of a man whose hypothesis has just been confirmed. I need you to find out about that camera footage, I told him. The intersection, whatever happened to it. Already working on it, Dennis said. Give me the weekend. Dennis didn't sleep much that weekend. I know because I didn't either. I sat in the study at Canyon Ridge Drive on Friday night until past midnight. The door locked. Diana asleep upstairs, going through 4 years of company emails that I had always had access to, but had never had reason to read carefully. Not the routine ones, the contract approvals, the vendor confirmations, the weekly project updates. The ones I was looking for were different. Shorter. Sent at odd hours. Addressed to an account whose display name was simply the initials DM. I found 31 of them. I was still sitting at that desk when my phone buzzed at 7:43 Saturday morning with Dennis's number. The camera footage, Dennis said without preamble. From the intersection on Scottsdale Road, the night of your accident. Tell me, I said. Gone. His voice was flat and precise as a blade. I submitted a public records request through the City Traffic Management Office Friday morning standard FOIA procedure. The response came back in 4 hours, which is unusually fast. The data from that camera for the evening of October 14th has been deleted. Not overwritten by routine cycling deleted. The system log shows a manual deletion command was executed at 11:52 p.m. on October 15th, approximately 26 hours after your accident. My jaw clenched until the hinges ached. Someone accessed the city system and wiped it, I said. That's what the log shows, Dennis said. Tracing who issued that command is harder. It'll require a formal law enforcement request to get the city IT records. But James' manual deletions from traffic management systems don't happen by accident. Someone with either system access or enough money to buy it went in and cleaned the record. A pause. 26 hours after the accident, while you were still in the ICU, I stood up from the desk and walked to the window. The desert at 7 in the morning, flat, pale light, the mountains still in shadow. Everything quiet and ordinary and completely indifferent. Build the record, I said. Everything you have on Vargas, the text message he received, the camera deletion timeline. I want it documented and dated. Already drafted, Dennis said. I'll have a full written report to Howard Slack by end of day Monday. I ended the call, poured myself a cup of coffee, and went back to the 31 emails. Howard called me Monday morning while I was still in the study, 3 empty coffee cups lined up on the corner of the desk, like witnesses. "James," he said, and something in the texture of his voice made me set down the mug very carefully. "I recovered a series of deleted emails from your company server. Ryan had deleted them from his account, but they were still in the backup system. We have a 90-day retention cycle on that server, which he apparently didn't account for." A beat. "I need you to hear one of them." "Go ahead," I said. Howard read it aloud. The email was addressed from Ryan's company account to the initials DM, the same account I'd been staring at all weekend. It was dated September 3rd, 6 weeks before my accident. Howard's voice was steady and professional as he read, but each sentence landed in my chest like something dropped from a height. "Timeline is set. The old man's schedule is consistent, leaves the office between 9 and 10, same route every night. Our friend in Mesa is confirmed. Once the old man is out of the picture, the transition needs to happen within 72 hours. Clean and fast. Make sure the paperwork is ready to file the same day. I've already signed the acquisition agreement, it just needs the trigger." The trigger, the same word I'd heard him use on the phone in my ICU room 8 weeks ago. My vision went slightly white at the edges. Not from shock, I had passed the point of shock 2 weeks ago. This was something else. Something that lived in the body rather than the mind. A physical response to the confirmation of the worst thing you've already known was true but had been managing by not saying out loud. My son had planned this before the accident. He had hired someone to track my schedule. He had set a trigger. He had written it down in a company email and sent it to a person whose full name I still didn't know, and he had used the words "the old man" like I was a line item on a balance sheet that needed to be cleared before the quarter closed. "James." Howard's voice careful and steady. "Are you with me?" "I'm with you," I said. My own voice surprised me low, and even the voice of a man whose hands had stopped shaking somewhere in the past 3 weeks and hadn't started again since. "The acquisition agreement he references, that's the document I showed you last week, the one he signed on day 5 in the ICU," Howard said. "This email confirms it was prepared in advance. This wasn't improvisation after the accident. This was a plan that the accident was designed to execute." The word "designed" sat in the room like something physical. "The initials DM," I said. "Do we have a name?" "Not yet," Howard said. "The account was created through a VPN and a temporary email service. I'm working with a digital forensics contact to trace it further. It may take another week." He paused. "But James, we have the email. We have the camera deletion log. We have Walter's USB. We have the financial records. We have Eddie Vargas's account. Taken together, what we have is not a collection of suspicious circumstances." His voice sharpened with quiet precision. "What we have is a case." I exhaled slowly and looked around the study, the room I'd built this company from the desk I had worked at since the company had a single client. The window that looked out over everything I had made. "Then let's finish building it," I said. I had one more conversation I needed to have before any of this moved forward. Marcus Webb had been sitting on the sidelines since that first phone call, patient and loyal and asking nothing. It was time to bring him in fully because what I was about to do needed someone inside the company I could trust completely. And there was only one person left who qualified. Marcus Webb's office at Kierland Commons had a view of the outdoor shopping promenade below the kind of Scottsdale scenery that looks like a movie set, all terracotta and palm trees, and women in sunglasses carrying bags that cost more than most people's monthly rent. I had sat in that office 100 times over 12 years. Closed deals there, celebrated there, argued there twice about contract terms that mattered to both of us enough to raise our voices. Marcus and I had the kind of partnership that didn't require constant maintenance because the foundation had been poured correctly. The first time, trust built, slowly tested, regularly, never once cracked. I called him the night before and said 4 words, "I need to see you." He'd said 7:30, "I'll have coffee," He was already standing when I came through the door, not because he'd heard the elevator, but because Marcus Webb was the kind of man who stood up when someone he respected walked into a room. He crossed the office and shook my hand, with both of his grip-firm eyes searching my face with the focused concern of a man who had been worried about more than just the accident for several weeks. "You look better than I expected," he said. "Sit down. Talk to me." I sat. He poured coffee from the carafe on his credenza and set a mug in front of me without asking how I took it, because after 12 years, he already knew. "Marcus," I said, "I need everything you remember about Ryan's visit in July. Every question he asked, every word of it." Marcus sat back in his chair and exhaled slowly, pressing his thumb and forefinger against the bridge of his nose. When he looked back up, his eyes carried the particular heaviness of a man who has been replaying a conversation in his head and finding new things wrong with it each time. "He came in on a Tuesday afternoon," Marcus said. "Said you'd asked him to get more familiar with the company structure. Your exact words apparently were that it was time he understood the architecture of the business, not just the day-to-day." His jaw tightened. "I should have called you to confirm that. I didn't. That's on me." "What did he ask?" "At first, things that sounded reasonable. How the asset ownership was distributed between the company and your personal holdings. What the operational chain of command looked like if you were traveling or unavailable." Marcus leaned forward, elbows on the desk, voice dropping. "And then he asked something that I've been turning over since the day you came home from the hospital." He paused, and I could see him choosing the words carefully. "He asked what the fastest legal pathway to operational control would be if you were," and I'm quoting him exactly, "suddenly and permanently unable to make decisions." The coffee mug in my hand suddenly felt very cold. "Suddenly and permanently," I said. "I gave him a general answer about the operating agreement and board procedures," Marcus said. And then I changed the subject because something in the way he'd phrased it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. He dragged one hand across his jaw, and I could see the frustration burning in his eyes. "I called you the next day, James. You said Ryan was just being thorough. You told me not to worry about it." His voice cracked on the last sentence, "Not much, just enough. I should have pushed harder. I keep thinking if I'd pushed harder." "Marcus." I leaned forward. "Stop. You did call me. I'm the one who didn't listen." He pressed his lips together and nodded once hard, like a man accepting something he was going to carry regardless. "There's something else," I said. "Diana called you, 6 weeks before the accident." Marcus went very still. "She asked whether I had updated my estate planning recently," I said, "whether the company assets were fully integrated into my will." His face shifted, recognition moving across it like weather across a landscape, slow and then all at once. "How did you know about that call?" "I've been putting together a very complete picture," I said. "Tell me what she said." Marcus set his mug down on the desk and stared at it for a moment, jaw working. "She called on a Thursday morning, very casual, very friendly. Said she'd been thinking about the future and wanted to make sure everything was in order. Asked if I knew whether your estate plan was current. Specifically asked whether the company assets were tied to your personal will or held separately." He looked up at me, and what was in his eyes now was the specific devastation of hindsight clarity. I told her I didn't know the details. She said, "Just curious," and hung up. His voice went rough. "James, she was checking for Ryan, wasn't she? She was trying to find out if the trust existed." "Yes," I said. The word landed between us like a stone dropped into still water. Marcus pressed both hands flat on his desk and breathed through his nose, his shoulders rigid, his face cycling through emotions too fast to name individually: grief, rage, guilt. The particular anguish of a man who trusted the wrong people and now has to watch someone he cares about absorb the cost of that. "What do you need from me?" he said, and his voice had gone to bedrock, solid, done with feeling ready for action. "I need you inside the company when this happens," I said. When it's over, there's going to be a period of instability. The partners will need to see a familiar face in a leadership role immediately. I need someone I trust absolutely running operations while we stabilize. Marcus didn't hesitate for even one full second. Done, he said. Whatever you need, whenever you need it. I reached across the desk and gripped his forearm once hard the way men do when words aren't sufficient, and they both know it. Marcus gripped back equally hard, and when I stood to leave, he walked me to the door with his hand on my shoulder, like a man who had decided he was going to stand next to me, regardless of what came through it. "James," he said as I stepped into the hallway, "finish it." Ryan called me that evening at 9:47. I was in the study reading through Howard's final evidentiary summary when my phone lit up with his name. He said he'd been thinking that it might be time for me to come back to the office even briefly to show the team I was recovering. His voice had that particular warmth it always manufactured when he was setting something up. I told him I'd think about it. Then I called Howard and told him to move the timeline forward. Ryan had called it a confidence-building exercise. I had let him believe that's what it was. I drove to the office on a Wednesday morning for the first time since the accident, taking the Scottsdale Road route. I now knew Ryan had paid someone to map for him. The building on North Scottsdale Road came into view the way it always had, 8 floors of glass and steel with Caldwell Construction Group in clean block lettering across the facade. And I felt something tighten in my chest that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the particular ferocity of a man looking at something that belongs to him. Still mine, still standing, still exactly where I'd left it. I parked in my spot on the ground level, the one with my name stenciled on the concrete wall, which I noticed had not been painted over, which told me Ryan was either superstitious or more patient than I'd given him credit for, and rode the elevator to the 8th floor. The reception team reacted the way I'd hoped they would. Genuine smiles, real relief, a chorus of welcomes from people who had worked beside me for years and meant every word. I shook hands and accepted backpats and said I was feeling stronger every day, and every word of that was the truth. Then I walked down the main corridor toward my office. Ryan had done it gradually enough that if you weren't looking for it, you might not have noticed. But I was looking. The office looked exactly as I had last left it, or almost. The small differences were the kind only an owner notices. The thermos on the corner of my desk that wasn't mine, the monitor angled a few degrees toward where a visitor would sit rather than where I always worked. Small adjustments, the kind a man makes when he's stopped thinking of a space as borrowed. My stomach turned over slow and cold. "Dad." Ryan's voice came from the doorway, bright and easy, a man arriving in a space he'd already decided was his. He crossed the room with his hand extended, and his smile dialed to full warmth. "You look great. Seriously, you look like yourself again." I shook his hand and held it a beat longer than necessary, looking him straight in the eye. "I feel like myself again," I said. "More than you know." He grinned at that. He shouldn't have. He walked me through the office the way a real estate agent walks a buyer through a property, pointing out updates he'd made to the workflow changes to the project management system, a new vendor agreement he was particularly proud of. I listened to everything he said and asked questions, and nodded in the right places, and the entire time I was cataloging the way he referred to decisions as "I decided," rather than "we decided. The way junior staff glanced at him before answering my questions, the way he'd quietly rearranged the gravity of the room over 7 weeks until it orbited him instead of me. He had moved fast. I'd give him that. We were passing the accounting wing when I saw Walter Pruitt coming the other direction, down the corridor, a stack of files under one arm. The moment Walter's eyes found mine, his whole body registered it, his step fractionally shorter, his chin lifting a flash of something fierce and relieved, crossing his face so quickly that anyone else would have missed it completely. I gave him the smallest nod I could manage, barely a degree of movement, and Walter responded by adjusting the files under his arm and looking straight ahead as he passed the most natural motion in the world, and underneath it, an entire conversation conducted in less than 4 seconds. Ryan, half a step ahead of me, noticed nothing. We ended up in the large conference room on the 8th floor, the one with the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over North Scottsdale Road. Ryan set his folder on the table and turned to face me with the expression of a man delivering a proposal he's confident about. "Dad, I've been thinking," he said. "With you still in recovery mode, the partners and major investors need reassurance. They need to see that Caldwell Construction has stable leadership and a clear path forward." He spread his hands open on the table, a gesture I recognized as his boardroom move, the one he'd picked up from watching me and hadn't quite perfected. "I want to organize a stakeholder meeting. Invite the key partners, the major investors, show them the strategic direction for the next 18 months. Strong, confident, unified." He paused. "I can run it." I looked at my son across the table that I had bought for this room 18 years ago, in a building I had built from nothing, in a company that bore my name on the outside wall. "What kind of agenda were you thinking?" I asked. Ryan's eyes lit up, actually lit up, a gleam of anticipation that he couldn't quite contain, and he opened his folder and slid a printed page across the table toward me. 2 pages, densely formatted, his name in the header where mine would normally appear. I picked it up and read through it carefully, keeping my expression neutral, with the practiced ease of a man who had been keeping his expression neutral for 7 weeks straight. "This is thorough," I said. "I've been working on it for a while," Ryan said, and the pride in his voice had an edge to it that he probably didn't hear himself. I set the pages down on the table with my palm flat on top of them. "Send me the digital version," I said. "I want to look it over tonight before we finalize anything." "Of course," Ryan said. "I'll send it this afternoon." He walked me back to the elevator, hand on my shoulder, still talking about the meeting, the venue, the catering, the talking points he'd prepared. He was so deep inside his own plan that he had stopped checking my face for information. That was his first mistake. His second was holding the elevator door open for me with a smile and saying, "It's good to have you back, Dad. This is going to be a great week." "I think you're right about that," I told him. The elevator doors closed between us, and I stood alone in the descending car with his agenda in my hand, and the specific clarity of a man who has just confirmed the last thing he needed to confirm. He wanted a stage. He'd built it himself, invited the audience, written the script. The only thing he hadn't accounted for was who was going to walk out and deliver the opening line. I spent that evening at Howard's office on Pima Road, Ryan's agenda open on one side of the desk, and the blank page of a new one on the other. Howard worked on the legal filings. I worked on the words. Same room, same guests, same date, completely different story. 4 days out, I stopped pretending to be tired. Not in front of Diana or Ryan around them, I was still the same recovering man. They'd grown comfortable managing the version of James Caldwell, who went to bed early and moved carefully and asked no difficult questions. But alone in the study with the door locked and Howard's complete evidentiary file open on the desk in front of me, I let that performance go entirely. What I felt in its place was not rage. It was something cleaner than that. Something with weight and direction, like a structure that's been under construction for weeks and has finally been load-tested and held. I drove to Howard's office on Thursday morning while Diana was at yoga. The Tuesday-Thursday schedule that I now understood had been arranged around Christopher Lane for 14 months. I pulled into Howard's parking lot on Pima Road and sat there for a moment, before going in watching a hawk circle something in the pale December sky above the strip mall. Patient, unhurried, absolutely certain of what it was doing. I went inside. Howard had 4 documents laid out across his desk, in a line evenly spaced, the way a surgeon arranges instruments before a procedure. "Walk me through each one," I said. He started from the left. "Criminal complaint filed yesterday morning with the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. wire fraud, identity theft, criminal conspiracy to commit fraud, and 1 count of attempted fraudulent transfer of assets. The complaint names Ryan Thomas Caldwell as primary defendant. He moved to the next document. The warrant was signed by a Maricopa County judge at noon yesterday. 2 plainclothes detectives have been assigned and briefed. They'll be available Monday morning on your signal, my signal. The word landed with a particular weight. Next, I said, civil lawsuit ready to file simultaneously. Howard tapped the 3rd document. Recovery of $2.7 million plus damages, dissolution of all fraudulent vendor entities, and full restoration of all company documents, board resolutions, and signing authorities that Ryan altered or created without authorization. He looked up at me. The moment we file, Ryan gets served. He'll know everything. He won't be in a position to do anything about it, I said. No, Howard agreed. He won't. He moved to the 4th document. Your new will, signed and notarized Tuesday. Ryan receives $1 legally sufficient under Arizona law to demonstrate you remembered him and made a deliberate choice. It prevents any future claim that he was accidentally omitted. A pause. Diana receives the settlement offer we discussed, the Tempe duplex, and a cash amount negotiated against Arizona's Community Property Framework, fair, by the letter of the law, not generous beyond it. Howard Slack's office has prepared a formal offer letter to her attorney. She can accept it quietly, or she can go to court and let a judge spend a morning reading the fraud timeline with her signature on 43 pages of it. The room was very quiet for a moment. Outside on Pima Road, the ordinary world was doing its ordinary Thursday business. There's one more thing, I said. Howard nodded. He'd known this was coming. The joint savings account, $1.2 million, I said. Every cent of it came from my corporate distributions over 18 years. My earnings, my signature deposited into a joint account, because that's what you do when you trust someone completely. I looked at Howard steadily. It's still legal for me to withdraw it in full. Entirely legal, Howard confirmed. Joint account in Arizona, either party can withdraw the full balance at any time. You have sole signing authority on those corporate distributions. The paper trail is clean. He met my eyes. James, do you want to do this today? Yes, I said. I was in and out of the bank in 40 minutes. The teller, a young woman named Ashley, who had helped me before and smiled when she saw my name, processed the transfer without a flicker of concern. $1.2 million moved to a new individual account at a different institution, leaving a joint balance of exactly 0. Completely legal, completely mine, completely done. I stood at the edge of the patio and looked at the open desert beyond the property line, at the distance that had always made Arizona feel like a place where a man could actually think, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Not happiness exactly, but its structural equivalent. The sensation of a foundation holding under the exact pressure it was built to bear. Diana was in the kitchen when I got home, moving between the counter and the stove with the comfortable domesticity of a woman who had no idea the account she'd been planning around had spent the afternoon at a different bank. "How was your day?" she asked, not looking up from whatever she was stirring. "Productive," I said. "Really productive." That evening after Diana went upstairs, I went to the bedroom closet and pulled out the navy blue suit I'd bought the year I signed my first $1 million contract. I hadn't worn it in 2 years. I hung it on the door and stood there looking at it for a long moment, the specific navy of a decision made and kept. Then I pulled a travel bag from the shelf and began quietly and methodically to pack. 1 change of clothes, my personal documents, the photograph of my parents that had sat on my desk since 1998. The things that were actually mine, stripped of everything that had just been furniture in someone else's plan. The bag was in the trunk of my car by 10:30 that night. Diana was asleep. The house was quiet. 2 more days. I texted Dennis that night, Monday morning. He replied in 30 seconds with 2 words, "We're ready." I put my phone down and stood at the bedroom window looking out at Desert Mountain, in the dark, at the neighborhood I had chosen, and built a life inside of, and was about to leave without looking back. Some things you don't mourn. You just finish them and walk forward into whatever comes next. The alarm was set for 5:15. I had been awake since 4. I lay there in the dark with my eyes open, listening to the house breathe around me. The HVAC, clicking through its cycle, the distant call of a coyote somewhere up in the McDowell foothills, the steady rhythm of Diana's breathing beside me, slow and easy, and completely undisturbed. She was sleeping the deep, untroubled sleep of a woman who had no idea what kind of day was waiting on the other side of the dawn. I got up carefully, not waking her, and moved downstairs through the dark, the way a man moves when he has been up early enough times, that the house becomes familiar even without light. I made coffee the right way, ground beans, the stovetop percolator I'd had since 1999, the one Diana had called unnecessarily complicated, every morning for 2 decades, and every morning drank anyway. I poured a cup, pushed open the back door, and took my chair on the patio facing east. The sky above the McDowell Mountains was still fully black. Then slowly the black softened to deep blue, that particular shade that exists only in the 20 minutes before an Arizona dawn, when the darkness is already losing, but the light hasn't committed yet. The ridgeline cut a sharp, clean edge against it. I had sat in this chair and looked at those mountains 10,000 mornings across 27 years. I wanted to look at them one more time from this exact spot, with this exact cup in my hand, before everything changed. The first light caught the highest ridge and turned it the color of an old copper penny. I watched it happen slowly, the way good things happen when you stop rushing them. Then I finished my coffee, went back inside, and put on the navy suit. Diana came downstairs at 6:40, in her robe hair loose around her shoulders, and stopped in the kitchen doorway when she saw me standing at the counter, fully dressed. "You're already in a suit," she said, blinking. Her voice had that soft, slightly bewildered quality of someone whose morning routine has been quietly disrupted. "Big day," I said. She studied me for a moment. Really studied me the way she hadn't in a long time. The way we stop truly seeing people when we've convinced ourselves we already know everything about them. Something moved across her face that I couldn't name precisely. Not suspicion. Something more like a feeling she recognized, but couldn't locate. "You look like yourself," she said softly. "The version of you I haven't seen in a while." "That's exactly the idea," I said. She crossed to the percolator, poured herself a cup without commenting on its unnecessary complication, and stood at the counter across from me. The kitchen light was warm and low. Outside the window, the mountains had gone fully gold, the way they go in December, when the sun hits them at that low winter angle and turns everything honest. "James." She wrapped both hands around her mug and looked at me carefully. "Are you okay? Not the recovering from the hospital okay? Actually okay." My chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with anger, and everything to do with 29 years of mornings in this kitchen. This woman, this light, this life that had been real before it became something else entirely. The ache of it moved through me cleanly, and I let it pass. "I will be," I said. "I genuinely will be." She nodded slowly, and I could see her turning something over in her mind, searching for the shape of a question she couldn't quite form. I picked up my keys from the counter, crossed to where she stood, and pressed a kiss to her forehead, the way I had done 1,000 times before, out of habit, out of history, out of a tenderness that had survived things it probably shouldn't have. Then I walked to the garage and didn't look back. The drive to the office took 22 minutes. I took the surface streets instead of the freeway, through the neighborhoods I had watched grow up around the company, across 3 decades, past buildings whose bones contained our work, past intersections, I had driven through so many times, they had stopped registering as choices and become simply the way. I drove at exactly the speed limit with both hands on the wheel, and with each block I could feel the day clicking into its final shape around me, the way a well-laid plan does when every piece has been in position long enough to settle. Marcus was in the lobby when I stepped off the elevator. He was leaning against the reception desk with his arms folded, and his jacket already on the posture of a man who had arrived early because showing up on time would have felt dangerously close to late. The moment he saw me come through the elevator doors, his whole body straightened and his eyes went sharp and present in the way they get when something important is actually happening. "Conference room is set," he said, falling into step beside me without preamble, his voice low and deliberate. 12 chairs around the table, 11 confirmed attendees plus Ryan. Coffee and water at each place. Printed agenda face down at every seat, your name in the header. "Howard?" I asked. "Parking structure level 2, Marcus said. "His associate is already upstairs, third seat from the left." "The detectives, 2 floors down. Plain clothes, both ready." He paused. "They said to call when you want them to move." I stopped walking and turned to face him directly. We were standing in the corridor outside the conference room door, and the morning light was coming through the window at the end of the hall and catching the side of his face and making him look exactly like what he was, a man who had shown up for me when showing up cost something. "Marcus," I said, "whatever this company looks like 6 months from now, it's because of what you did these last 8 weeks. I need you to know that." His jaw worked hard for a moment. His eyes went bright and glassy, and he blinked it back fast, the way men of a certain generation do when emotion catches them somewhere they weren't expecting it. He put his hand out. I gripped it, and he gripped back hard, firm, the grip of a man holding on to something he has decided is worth holding. "Go finish it," he said. I nodded once. Then I pushed open the conference room door. Ryan arrived at 8:50 with his folder under one arm and his phone in his other hand, and the loose, unhurried stride of a man walking into a room he has already decided belongs to him. He came through the reception area, saw me standing near the conference room entrance, and his face broke open into a wide, easy smile, genuine-looking, warm, the smile he had always been good at. "Dad!" He spread his arms slightly, the gesture of a man who feels the morning going his way. "This is going to be a great day. I think you might be right about that," I said. He pushed open the conference room door, swept his arm toward the room in an easy after-you gesture, and I stepped inside. 12 people already seated, coffee steaming. The December light pouring hard and clear through the floor-to-ceiling windows above North Scottsdale Road, flooding every corner without mercy. Ryan moved to the head of the table, set his folder down, pulled out his chair, reached for the agenda printed and placed face down at each seat and flipped it over. He read the header, turned it over again to confirm what he had seen, then looked up at me slowly, the smile still on his face but something underneath it shifting, cracking along a line that hadn't been visible 30 seconds ago. "Dad." His voice had dropped half a register. "What exactly is this?" I walked to the foot of the table and stood at my chair. The chair I had sat in for 27 years of meetings, every difficult decision this company had ever made, and looked at my son across the full length of that table. "Sit down, Ryan," I said. "It's time to begin." The room pulled in a single collective breath. 12 people looked from Ryan to me and back to Ryan, reading the current running between us the way people always can when something real is happening underneath the surface of an ordinary Monday morning. Ryan sat down slowly, his folder still closed in front of him, the agenda with my name in the header lying face up on the table in front of him, like something he couldn't stop looking at. Outside the windows, North Scottsdale Road went about its business in the winter light, completely indifferent to the fact that 27 years of work were about to be settled in the next room, in the next hour, in the next 45 minutes of a man's life that had been quietly building toward this exact morning for a very long time. At 9 o'clock, the room was full. 12 people around that table, partners who had trusted me with their capital investors, who had watched me build Caldwell Construction Group from a rented two-room office on Scottsdale Road into something that carried real weight in this city. The December light came sharp and cold through the floor-to-ceiling windows, filling every corner without mercy, without softening the kind of light that shows things exactly as they are. Ryan stood at the head of the presentation screen with his folder open, and his confidence sitting on him the way it always had. Loose practiced the posture of a man who had spent months rehearsing a performance he expected to deliver without interruption. He hadn't looked carefully enough at the agenda on the table yet to notice that the name at the top of the title page was not his. I stood at the far end and waited. He cleared his throat, swept the room with an easy, familiar smile, and began. Thank you all for being here this morning. As most of you know, my father has been recovering from a serious accident, and during that time I've been stepping in to manage operations and maintain continuity for— Thank you, Ryan, I said, not loud. It didn't need to be. I'll take it from here. The shift moved through the room immediately, every head turning, the air itself changing register. Ryan's smile didn't vanish all at once. It dissolved from the edges inward like something losing its structure under pressure it hadn't been built to hold. I walked to the head of the screen, picked up the remote, and turned to face the table. Thank you all for coming, I said. I've spent the last 8 weeks recovering. During that time, I had the opportunity to do something I hadn't done in years. Stop moving and listen very carefully to the people closest to me. I clicked the remote. A financial timeline filled the screen, 22 months of transactions, entity names, dollar figures, all of it laid out in clean black columns that required no interpretation. What I heard and what I found were not the same story. This morning, I'd like to share both. The murmur around the table was immediate and low. A partner near the window pushed his reading glasses up and leaned forward. Someone else set down their coffee cup and didn't reach for it again. The entity on the left is Pinnacle Development Services, LLC, I said. Registered in Nevada. No employees, no physical address, no actual operations. I clicked. Between 22 months ago and last October, Caldwell Construction Group paid Pinnacle $840,000. 5 more entities appeared on the screen. These are its counterparts, 6 shell companies in total. Combined payments $2.7 million over 22 months. The room went very still. Dad! Ryan's voice came sharp from the far end, fast, like a hand reaching out to catch something already falling. His face had drained of color, the flush of confidence replaced by something that had no performance in it at all. Those numbers have no context. There were contractual structures that explain every one of those transfers, and standing there presenting a single column without— Sit down, Ryan. He sat. His hands pressed flat against the table, knuckles going white, jaw tight, with something he hadn't found words for yet. I looked toward the door. Could someone ask Mrs. Caldwell to come in? The door opened 30 seconds later, and Diana stepped through. Ryan had invited her to celebrate. She was wearing the green blouse, the one she always chose when she needed to feel composed and ready. The one I had watched her button up before 100 dinners and 100 moments she wanted to face well. She came through the door, saw the slide on the screen, saw 12 faces that were not celebrating anything, and went pale from the inside out, the color leaving before her mind had finished telling her why. Diana, I kept my voice completely level. Thank you for being here. Her hand came up slowly and pressed flat against her chest. Fingers spread wide as if she were physically trying to hold something in place that had already started to come apart. I clicked to the next slide. These transactions required a second authorized signature to process. Diana Caldwell's signature appears on 43 of them. A sharp intake of breath from somewhere down the table. She did not originate the transfers, but she signed every one. 43 times across 22 months. Diana's chin began to tremble. Her lips parted, and a small fractured sound came out, barely audible, the kind of sound a person makes when the story they have been telling themselves collides with the version on the screen. I clicked once more. Ryan's email filled the display, recovered from the server backup, dated September 3rd, the words sitting in their author's own phrasing, with no ambiguity and nothing that context could soften. Once the old man is out of the picture, the transition needs to happen within 72 hours. Clean and fast. The room made a sound I will never forget. Not loud, collective. The sound of a dozen people exhaling at the same moment, a dozen separate understandings of this morning giving way to the one that was actually true. Ryan came to his feet hard, his chair scraping back against the floor. His face was fury and desperation, and underneath both of those, something that looked disturbingly close to grief. That email refers to a project transition timeline. There are documents, there are files that give that sentence an entirely different meaning, and you cannot stand there and show one line to 12 people without, "Mr. Caldwell." Howard Slack's voice came from the corner, unhurried, final. The voice of a man who has spent 30 years watching people discover that paperwork does not negotiate. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and fixed Ryan with the calm regard of someone who has already seen every version of this moment play out. A criminal complaint was filed with the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office last Thursday. It names you as primary defendant on wire fraud, identity theft, and criminal conspiracy charges. A beat of pure quiet. The arrest warrant was signed Friday at noon. Ryan's face came apart, not all at once, but the way a structure fails when the load finally exceeds what it was built to carry. The center going first, then everything surrounding it following in sequence. He looked at me across the full length of that table, and for the first time in 31 years, I saw my son's face with nothing in front of it, no armor, no strategy, no performance of any kind. The conference room door opened. 2 plainclothes detectives stepped inside. "Ryan Thomas Caldwell." The lead detective's voice was professional and carried no emotion in either direction. Ryan looked at the detectives, then back at me. His chest was heaving, his jaw shaking hard, his eyes wet and searching my face with a desperation that tore at something deep in my chest, not enough to stop me, but enough that I felt the tearing. "Dad." His voice broke open on the word, split right down the middle, raw and exposed and younger than 31 years old. "You loved me. You always told me you loved me. My whole life you said it." I held his gaze and did not look away. "I did," I said. My voice stayed steady. "Every decision I made for 31 years, I made for this family. Every early morning, every dollar reinvested instead of spent. All of it for you." I let that settle for exactly one breath. What you chose to build with that love is yours to carry, Ryan, not mine. The detective stepped forward. The handcuffs came out. Ryan Caldwell was walked out of the 8th floor conference room of the company that bore his father's name past 12 witnesses on a Monday morning in December. Diana stood at the edge of the room with both hands pressed over her mouth, tears running freely down her face, her shoulders trembling with the effort of containing something that was far too large to be contained. I looked at her once steadily, without cruelty, without any of the things I had once imagined this moment might produce in me. "Howard will be in touch," I said quietly. "About the settlement." She pressed her hands harder over her face and bent slightly forward, her whole body shaking with silent, broken sobs. I turned back to the table. 12 people. 12 faces looking at me. "I apologize for the nature of this morning," I said. "Caldwell Construction Group is fully operational under my direct authority, effective immediately. Marcus Webb will serve as interim operations director through the transition. Your investments are protected. Your partnerships are intact." I looked at every face in turn. "Thank you for your trust. In 27 years, it has never been wasted." By 2 o'clock, the building had gone quiet, in the way that only happens after something irreversible. I sat at the foot of the conference table, my chair, the one I had occupied for hundreds of meetings across 27 years, and pressed both palms flat against the surface. The wood was cool and solid and entirely indifferent to everything that had just happened in this room, and I found that strangely comforting. The table didn't need to process it. The table had just been a table. I envied it a little. The door opened, and Marcus stepped partway in, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbow. The posture of a man who had already mentally moved to the next thing. "You still in one piece?" he asked. My throat tightened in a way I hadn't expected, not grief, not anger, but something rarer and harder to name. The specific ache of a man who has been carrying an enormous weight for so long that when he finally sets it down, the absence of it feels almost like loss. "More than one piece," I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended. I cleared it. "Honestly, Marcus, I'm okay." He studied me with the careful attention of 12 years of partnership. The kind of look that doesn't need to perform anything, that simply takes inventory. "The partners called before they hit their cars," he said, walking in fully now and stopping at the far end of the table. "Both of them." Bellman said, and I'm quoting directly here, "I want it on record that I always thought the kid was off." A sound came out of me that was almost a laugh. He absolutely did not always think that. "No," Marcus said, the corners of his mouth pulling up. "He absolutely did not. But he's saying it now, and in this business that's close enough to loyalty." He pulled out the chair across from mine and rested his hands on the back of it without sitting. "The company is stable, James. The stakeholders are reassured. Whatever needs to happen legally from here, Howard's on it. You don't need to be in this building today." "I know," I said. "Then go," he said, and his voice dropped just slightly, the way it does when he means something more than the words. "Seriously, go." I straightened my jacket and took one slow look around the room. The cold coffee cups, the knocked-over water glass, nobody had righted the particular quality of Arizona winter light, coming low and golden through the floor-to-ceiling windows, making everything look older and more honest. The room smelled like the aftermath of something that had been a long time coming. At the doorway, I stopped and put my hand on Marcus's shoulder. He was already reaching for the water glass, already beginning the quiet work of putting the room back in order. "Take care of it," I said. He looked up at me and said without hesitation, "Already am. Have been for 8 weeks." I squeezed his shoulder once. Then I walked out. The elevator ride down was 30 seconds of absolutely nothing, and I was grateful for every one of them. In the lobby, Patricia at the front desk looked up, and her expression shifted, not pity, not awkwardness, but something closer to quiet respect, and she said, "Safe travels, Mr. Caldwell," as if she already knew I was leaving. "Thank you, Patricia," I said. "Hold the fort." "Always do," she said, and went back to her screen. I pushed through the glass doors and stepped onto North Scottsdale Road. The December air hit me immediately dry and sharp, carrying that particular desert chill that reminds you even Arizona has seasons. Even the desert has its version of cold. I stood still for a moment on the sidewalk with my hands in my jacket pockets and just breathed it in. My car was in its spot. The travel bag was in the trunk exactly where I had placed it Thursday evening, because even then, even before the meeting, some part of me had already known how this day was going to end and had packed accordingly. I opened the driver's door, paused, and turned back for one last look at the building. 8 floors, the Caldwell Construction Group name on the facade, 27 years of my life, embedded in every floor of it. Still standing, still mine. I got in, started the engine, pulled out. I took Scottsdale Road north through the intersection on Canyon Ridge Drive, where everything had changed 8 weeks ago, passed through it clean without hesitation, without my foot even thinking about the brake. Then I merged onto the I-17 on-ramp heading north out of the city. My phone buzzed on this passenger seat. Diana's name lit up the screen. Once, then again. Then a third call before I had fully merged into traffic. On the fourth, I pulled onto the shoulder, picked up the phone, and typed exactly 6 words. I heard every word in that room. I hit send, put the phone in the glove box, clicked it shut. Then I pulled back onto the I-17 and drove. The window went down. Cold air flooded in fast and clean, carrying the faint mineral smell of distant rain somewhere up in the Verda Valley, where the elevation climbs, and the desert gives way to something rougher and darker and more honest. The Bradshaw Mountains came into view ahead, going blue and enormous in the afternoon light, and I felt something crack open in my chest that wasn't pain. It was bigger than pain. It was older. It was relief, deep bone-level relief moving through me, like the first full breath a man takes after a long time underwater. I had no reservation. No destination confirmed. Sedona was 90 minutes north. Flagstaff was 2 hours. I hadn't chosen. And for the first time in 61 years of relentless building and planning and executing, with the kind of precision that leaves no room for uncertainty, not deciding, felt like the most powerful decision I had ever made. 61 years, I said out loud to no one, to the open window, to the mountains going blue ahead of me. And this is the first day in all of them that belongs entirely to me. The car didn't answer. The desert didn't answer. But the road ahead opened up wide and clean, and I pressed the accelerator down and felt the engine surge forward without hesitation. Behind me, a son in custody, a marriage dissolved, a company restored, and 27 years of work proven unbreakable by the very people who had tried their hardest to break it. Ahead of me, the high desert, the cold, clean air, and a sky so blue and broad it looked like the first one ever made. They had wanted a dead man's estate. Instead, they got a living man's verdict. They had looked at 61 years and seen only an inheritance to divide. They had been wrong about the math. Wrong about the man. Wrong about which one of us was actually running out of time. I rolled both windows all the way down. The cold hit my face like something honest pressing flat against something true. For the first time in a very long time, I was not building for anyone else. I was not protecting anything. I was not holding the line. I was just driving north. And for right now, for today, for this one wide-open December afternoon in Arizona, that was more than enough. If there is one thing 61 years and one near-death experience taught me, it is this: the people sitting closest to your table are not always the ones rooting for you to stay in your seat. I built a company with my hands and my time and every good year I had. I trusted without verifying. I loved without questioning. And I almost paid for that with everything, including my life. That is my truth, and I own every inch of it. So let me be direct with you the way I wish someone had been direct with me. Don't wait for a hospital bed to show you who the people around you really are. Pay attention now. Ask the hard questions now. The people worth keeping will not flinch when you do. I am not a bitter man. I want to be clear about that. What happened to me changed me, but it did not break me. I believe, and I say this genuinely, that God left me conscious in that ICU room for a reason. Not for revenge, for clarity. And clarity, it turns out, is the most valuable thing a man can walk away with. This is what a real family story looks like sometimes, not the version on greeting cards, but the version that tests everything you thought you knew. These grandpa stories don't always end with everyone at the same table. Sometimes the most honest family story ends with one man driving north on an open road, finally free. If any part of this grandpa story stayed with you, if something in this family story hit closer to home than you expected, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is a good time. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. It means more than you know. One more thing. Before you go, some of the stories on this channel contain fictional elements created purely for the purpose of entertainment and reflection. If that's not the kind of content you're looking for, no hard feelings at all, there's something out there made exactly for you. But if you're staying, I promise the next one is worth it.